All right. Good morning, y'all.
Hey,
Good
good
morning.
morning.
So, episode 4, initial thoughts, because that was ridiculous and exciting, and Black Indiana Jones.
Oh, I don't know. I'm on my fifth watching. That's the first thing. Okay. I think the first is just for enjoyment. The second is turn on the closed caption. The third is closed caption and louder volume. The fourth
Right.
is stop, pause, go, pause, stop, go. It was a lot. It was a lot, as every episode is.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed the pacing of this episode a lot. So, episode 3, there was a lot of commentary and emotion regarding what was happening with the priestess, and towards the end, that final scene. And this one, they did a lot of quick cuts between scenes, and we got to learn more about the quick characters and their motivations and things like that. So, I really appreciated the pacing on this episode.
Mm-hmm. Chai? Because you were screaming. I was screaming at you while you were screaming, watching it, screaming back at me. So,
We were literally screaming back at you. You hadn't watched the whole thing yet.
I was stuck at Letty on the bridge, and China was like, "Did you watch it?" I was like, "I'm still stuck. I'm not there yet."
I had to sit on it. And then I had to watch it a couple times. There was that back and forth, but I love adventure on top of fantasy and sci-fi and nonfiction in general. So just to get, that full adventure episode where you get to, solve the riddle and there's codes, and then Montrose, remembers something that actually helps them, throughout the way. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize, should we introduce ourselves to people who
Introduce.
don't know?
Yes. So I am Taylor Made. I'm the admin of this beautiful, melanated, lovely group. And joining me are all of our lovely moderators and forward thinkers. You guys could just pop in. Justin.
I am Justin Davis, one of the moderators.
Chai.
I'm China. I'm one of the moderators as well.
And Pamela.
I am Pamela, also a moderator and just in it to win it. I'm trying to solve it all.
I'm Mike. I'm not a mod. I'm just a blurred, and I love this show. So I'm here to talk it up with y'all.
Mike is one of the brilliant brains in this think tank. So let's get into this. I have our outline here, starting at the top of the show because they just beat us upside the head right out the gate with this radio announcement.
All right, so they started off with there's an announcement about American fears about Russian nuclear aggression, and this is something that we're going to come back to later in the episode. But the show's called History of Violence, and this is one of those pieces in that fear and how Americans interpret the what they perceive to be an impending threat.
Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of, I think we were tying in a little bit of that Whitey on the Moon idea, because while these fears are running rampant, Black folk are still being Black somewhere, still dealing, with the day-to-day.
Yeah, there's I was going to say, at the exact same time that you had the Red Scare and McCarthyism, you also had the Lavender Scare, which is about, we're going to touch on the underground for gays and lesbians. And so you've got a lot of things happening with scaring individual sectors of the American population. So the Lavender Scare, let's just put a little right there.
Okay.
This is also, I noticed throughout this episode, there is definitely the theme of duality. And this is the first thing that we get right out the gate is, there is this impending fear. There is this shadow of imminent catastrophe, from this arms race that's going on. Yet Montrose is still trying to come to terms with his own demons. And, when it comes over the radio, we've entered a new global age. He says, ain't shit new about it. Why'd he keep cooking up death for the rest of us to eat? And that directly tied back for me, Whitey on the Moon. There's all these things going on. And white and Black people have always had very different issues, especially in this era that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in this scene, we also see the first sort of hints that Montrose knows a little bit more than we think he knows, because he is holding the bylaws that were given to him by George. And we're thinking maybe when they were having that deathbed confessional in the last episode, or in the second episode when we lost George, and he takes it upon himself to burn them. And we notice he has this sort of, I don't know, it was like a slight little possession. I thought it sounded like another voice coming out of him for a minute when he said, "Smells like Tulsa." Anybody else hear this?
Yeah, you hear his voice, and then you hear this other guttural voice overlaid over his that says, "It smells like Tulsa," which now draws us back to, so in the history of violence, we have a few things happening. We have the Soviet aggression, we have some of Montrose's past, and then we also had the Tulsa massacre in 1921, which now we know that he was there for.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about history of violence, remember there's also in that overlay voiceover the sounds of what his father caught him doing, which was, "Why do you have a flower in your hair?" Primping in the mirror, and of course the beatings ensue. And so more history of violence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. China, didn't you have a note about the Tulsa, like the burning of the bylaws?
Right. So I thought that was interesting, because everything in the show is intentional. And so when I heard "Smells like Tulsa," I immediately thought, burning of the bylaws like it never existed, just as the destruction of Tulsa ensued like it never existed. And so I thought that was a nice duality as well. And now we do know that Montrose he must have been about 15 or a teenager when that happened. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So coming out of this, we see Christina flying through town, sprinkled with a little bit of salt. Who was that? What was that playing over it? Money? No, not Money.
Better have my money.
Bitch better have my money. That's right.
Rihanna?
So we got Christina having some flavor, flying through town, and she shows up on Letty's doorstep.
Right. So now we have another. So episode 3, we get this huge affirmation of African traditional religions and the magic associated with that. So here we have another nod to that. So Christina shows up at the doorstep, and she can't get through the threshold because it's protected by the seal from the priestess in the last episode. And so we're seeing that it's not just the magic that they have on the Sons of Adam side. It's also they're up against something else, which is an other magic to them. And it's at least, we know it's at least as powerful as what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a game recognizes game moment when her eyes go, "Oh," when it goes, "Oh, you're a little bit more worthy as an opponent than I ever imagined." And then of course she goes into her speech to let her know, you're not all that, he's not all that, despite him having the blood, which is not unusual for us. Say we go into the corporate world as Black people, we think we have our shit together, and then somebody sideswipe you with some information that you would never be privy to. And it's just always a learning curve for you to climb up. So I know I took it all the way out there, but to bring it back.
I mean, it's part of it. It's in the soup.
It's in the soup, and it's in the DNA of how we live. So that was a good moment.
Yeah, and I love that scene because
I forgot Dracula, the whole thing about invite me in. That shows up right there.
And that's something I didn't even think of. I just thought, why is Christina the one that can't get over the doorway? And I'm thinking, it's because the house is protected from evil intentions, anyone with evil intentions. And the way she just walks up and she's just, "Oh, can I come in?" and just immediately and she just tries to walk up in the house.
Right.
I said that was a really great scene.
But magic tells her she must ask, which is very interesting.
Right.
She knew to ask rather than, even though we felt she was going to walk straight in.
So, Pam, you brought up. Oh, go ahead, Justin. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that also pertains to vampires because they can't enter the home unless you invite them. And also with the blood on the doorpost, when you go back to the Bible, the angel of death who came to slay people, in Egypt, they couldn't pass that threshold because the blood was on the door, with letting them know that do not enter this one. So there's some biblical aspects, and there's also some aspects, some horror, such as Dracula.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the point that Pam brought up about Christina giving Letty this speech about it's not always about, don't let the men fool you into thinking it's all about them. This is the first foreshadowing we get that the women may be the heroes of the story. The story has been told from the male lens, Tick's lens especially, and then we see some of George. But then we also saw last week a powerful view from Letty's lens. Next week we get Ruby, but Christina is saying, don't be fooled here. This is something else than what you're thinking. And Tick is not special just because he has the blood. That's just what he has. And so now we're starting to think, wait a minute, Tick may not be the hero of the story. Perhaps it's Letty.
Mm-hmm. And this is also the first time we get an explanation of what the orrery is.
Yep.
Absolutely. The last part that I would add, Mike, is when Christina does a mini recruitment of a Black woman at the door. This is not unusual. We talked about how Margaret Sanger, tried to recruit Black women to that whole suffragette movement. And then when the time came, they abandoned Black women. So this is so layered. You got to really listen to every syllable that comes out of these characters' mouths and every action that they portray. But go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's absolutely right. So we leave the doorstep and we reach Hip at the garage or at the office. Where is she?
It's the garage office, right?
Yeah.
Garage office, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we reach Hip and she's on the phone with her dad trying to figure out what this orrery is, what these planet symbols, etc. might represent, and she is hit with the question of these two sons. What do we think about that?
So the Ori has two sons with a dad. At one point, is thinking it's two moons, but Hip says that they never eclipse each other, so perhaps it's two sons, and so that could be a homonym for SON or SUN. And so we also know that there's this Greek mythology backstory behind, you call it Hippolyta, and her daughter Diana. And in that mythology, in both Greek mythology and DC Comics version of Greek mythology, Diana is Hippolyta's daughter that she had with Zeus, which incited the anger of Hera, the goddess. And so we're thinking we know one son. It may be Tick. It may be Letty. We don't know. But now I'm asking myself the question, is Diana going to factor into this as perhaps a second son?
I hope so.
I know.
I love Diana.
I know. She's precious.
And from the very beginning with that comic that she gave George before he left, we know that she, every time George travels, she gives him a comic, but that one in particular was a huge foreshadow, I think, to Hip and the role that she's going to play.
Mm-hmm. And Hip was also hit with that every locked thing has its key. And that might have been a little foreshadowing for that orrery and for other things, I think, in the episode.
All right, things. So I'm sorry, Mike. If you can't come through the door, what's the key? What's the magic word? Everything has a key. Go ahead.
Right. So Phil tells her everything has a key and you'll find it is the last thing he says to her. And so somehow we see that Hip got that orrery out of the house. We don't know how, but now she has it. And she's the only one thinking about it in a way that could unlock the secrets of it.
Right.
And I was thinking about this also. Another locked thing is Hip's understanding of what happened to her husband.
Right.
And she's hell-bent on finding whatever that is as well. So she's got her own little journey that she's going on, right?
Yeah.
Her own little locked mystery. So we leave Hip and we hit the library. And there was something notable about them showing the segregation of the library.
So yeah, they start with this wide shot of the library so that we can see, you can see Letty walking in, but if you look at the way that it's shot, you see like a lot of height in that shot. So you can see the title Southside Colored Library. And this is a library that was on the south side of Chicago. And during the 50s, the west and the south side of Chicago were primarily Black. But because of segregation and the way it's evolved, that's still the same way now. And so I read that as a nod that they're saying, yeah, it was like this in the 50s. It's also like this now, just in the same way that we saw Letty take the rough ride in episode 3, and Freddie Gray also takes it in the 21st century here. So they're being intentional about how they show these things. There's a continuity in what we're seeing versus what we're living.
Mm-hmm. Justin, you were saying?
No, I'm just agreeing with what he's saying about Freddie Gray and the rough ride that Letty took. And they utilize that as a scare tactic.
Mm-hmm. So we see Tick, and he's searching through these books, and he's trying to find a clue, and he keeps finding his father showing up a step ahead. And we see Montrose written in the book, and there's a lot of Easter eggs in this scene, because they give us, we get that they're about to embark on a journey, but what were some of these Easter eggs that we found in this scene?
So speaking of journey, the little boy who can't stand them being all loud is reading Journey to the Center of the Earth, and I love him when he throws that book down.
Give him an Emmy.
I feel that frustration, and it puts me right back to being a kid, where it's just like, so, but that's also, Tick, we find later, alludes to the same thing, Journey to the Center of the Earth. And I looked into it. The author of this, Jules Verne, he's also the writer of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is interesting how water plays a recurring role throughout, this entire episode. And so that's a nice Easter egg that I saw.
And also that the art directors were the other names on the loan slip in the book.
That was so cool.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what told me to just look it up, but when, Tick pulls out that slip, you see Nathan Crotchman, Audra Avery, Omar Foster, Kevin Kalaba, and then Montrose. And so I didn't look up the specifics of those, the dates that they, checked out those books. But in the second book he opens, it's the same name. So I said, let me just look this up. And they are the art directors and graphic designers for the series. And so I thought that was a nice thing to throw in there for them.
And there was something about the dates.
Right. The last date where Montrose takes out all those books is August the 20th. If we go back to Hippolyta in the car garage, she makes an off comment to the kids who are going off. Bobo and Diana are going off to read comics at Bobo's house, and we know Bobo is Emmett Till. And Emmett Till dies on August 28th. So there's an 8-day span from the time that Montrose checks out the books, and then they go on this adventure. So kind of weird foreshadowing in terms of how much time we have in this story before Emmett meets his demise. So.
Yeah, they keep laying these historical markers throughout the show so that we know where we are in time, because that's an important part of the show. Another Easter egg that we saw two shots of W.E.B. Du Bois in the photo, and in his book. So Du Bois did a lot of research on Africans and how Africans transitioned to the United States or America. And so one of the things he did was look at religion and how the enslavers tried intentionally to remove the African culture from the African. And so the things that Du Bois recognized that remained, that they could not get rid of, were the priest and the medicine man. And so in The Souls of Black Folk, he writes that these are the two things that endured the horrors of what the enslavers tried to do to those Africans. And so we're seeing those two characters show up in different ways throughout the series.
And ironically, I believe The Medicine Man was also one of the books on the table.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Okay, and also there was this running theme of Tick not listening to Letty in this episode, right?
Yes, yes. So we see a number of times Tick is just not hearing her at all, and because Misha Green is the showrunner here, I'm understanding that she's intentional about things like this, and so this is one of many, and we'll point them out as we go through. But Tick, again, she gives him the right advice, he doesn't listen.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I noticed this also from the last episode. I think it may have been alluding to this episode because this is where we see them like legit bump heads. And for the life of me, their relationship is just so odd.
Mm-hmm.
But even in the past episode, it made me think of, when Tick is like, your mind might be playing tricks on you about this haunting. And he says it without really saying it because he doesn't want to offend her. But, going back to episode 2, when Letty, talks to George and is like, do you think it's something from the war? Do you think he's talking about monsters and he's talking about, so it's that they doubt each other,
Mm-hmm.
but Tick almost doesn't even know that he's doing it to Letty as well.
Right.
And he was so offended, back when she was alluding to that. And so this is the episode where we really see them like, kind of go at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she again points out, looking at his bag. I think this is the second episode where she said to him, "You leaving?"
Mm-hmm.
With no word, no regard. There's a whole layer to that, and I'm not going to get into about Black women and Black men and you leaving, you staying. But it's that one sentence that, like, how could you even think of leaving me? And he's always like reassuring. It's a lie, because in the next episode, I'm sure he's probably going to have that damn duffel bag. Like, I'm checking out.
So after we leave the library, we hit the bar, and we see, first of all, we see this baseball theme running again. Everybody's at the bar watching the baseball game, right?
But listening.
Listening. Right. Listening to the baseball game.
Right.
And we get the second piece of this Russian analogy.
Right. So Montrose is frustrated with Tick that he's pursuing this. He wants him to stop. And so he lets him know. He says, he uses the line that we're the Reds in this situation, meaning we're the ones that they're afraid of. We're the ones that they have propped up our power to be fearful of. And so they're going to mobilize everything they have against who we are, just out of fear of us being who they think that we are. So it's tying that strand together in a way that's just letting us know that American fear toward Black people is something that's been enduring, and it's something that the characters are also aware of.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting that you say that, because I also took it as Montrose has always been, throughout this entire time that we see his character, he's always felt like he's, and the family is at a disadvantage. Like, even back to the scene in the previous episode where he's like, white people have magic on their side too, not just their skin.
Mm-hmm.
And, boy, don't you ever stop, you're going to get yourself killed. And when he says we're the Reds in this situation, we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, you're gonna fail. And he always has this in the back of his mind. And I think it relates to his upbringing and his dad. And, his dad always instilling in him, like, what you are and who you are is not okay. And it's never gonna be okay. And you're always gonna, and what you are, who you are, puts you at even more of a disadvantage than just your skin.
Yeah. And
so him hearing that all his life, then telling Tick, boy, you have your head in the clouds, you're reading all this sci-fi, you're doing all this and that, you're gonna fail too. And so I think that was important to note, that he always feels like, we're always gonna be behind.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And then there's also two historical nods here too. So you have what we saw at the beginning, which is that we know that Montrose lived through Tulsa. So that echoes the hopelessness that Black people feel as we try to advance. And we know that there's something there that's going to hold us back. But then also we know that later, not the characters, but later, how fear of communism and McCarthyism was leveraged against Black leaders as a way to, and so I think that's a message that's signifying to us how we're viewed and one of the tactics that has been used against us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this is also a time where we get a little bit of info on how much Montrose knows and isn't saying, because he drops that 34 other lodges line, and we're like, okay, so Montrose is holding out.
Yeah.
Okay, we still don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy, but he's obviously withholding information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So pop over to Christina. Now she's in the middle of the street running around with some kids, playing hide and seek. And we looked into the history of this game of hide and seek, and it was something about it being like a hunting game, exploring life skills and this and this. And they ask her, like, is this your first time? And you know, don't you know how to play this? And then she's like, no, this is my first time playing. And we're starting to see at this point another running theme going through the show of these kids explaining to adults, or sort of calling out adults on what's going on here. Like, why don't you know this? The kid in the library, like, what are you guys doing? This is a library, be quiet. These kids, why don't you know how to play hide and seek? And we're seeing another little string of something going on with these kids and trying to figure out what's going on with the adults.
Right. You know, that's a biblical nod also to, and the children shall lead them, right?
Right.
So the children, most children, you're fresh on earth, you're a fresh soul. You don't have fear in the same way as an adult that learns over time. There are certain things you need to fear. And how to be free is probably the thing that belongs most to children. Being free of spirit and just like, you know what, the rules are the rules. Let's do it. Let's not do it. And why wouldn't you say or speak up or do this? Because they have no fear, no guile. And so the children shall lead them. I'm thinking about real quickly, Good Times. The writers of Good Times always gave the most powerful things to say to Michael, character Michael, right?
Right.
Black Jesus came from Michael's mouth. Everything that was pointed and bad about the society, they gave the lines to Michael, the children, because no one's necessarily going to prosecute or go after the kids. But I just find it interesting that writers always give the children the opportunity to be like, yo, this is messed up. We don't need to be like this. So.
Right.
And I think the children, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the younger generation seeing what the previous generation has done and is doing and calling them out on it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure. And I think the children, especially in this episode, keep reinforcing that there are rules. You know, the boy in the library, we're in a library, you're supposed to be quiet. The boy playing hide and seek, don't you know how to play? These are the rules. And then, you know, later we see Diana, and she's talking about, okay, you should be honest. You always teach me to tell the truth. There's these rules. And so these children constantly bringing this up in this episode is kind of reinforcing that everybody is not playing by the rules anymore. All of the adults, there's no more rules. It's like, what's going on? There's magic, there's monsters, there's spells, there's missing pages. Everything you know is not what you know.
And these are all things it's a child. Like, there's magic, there's monsters, and a child would be like, really? And, you know, an adult would be like, be quiet, just stop.
And so from this scene, we get some insight into Christina and Lancaster, the police. It's all part of it, his lodge. She gets taken to him at his secret office behind a wall, right? And we hear, what's going on in the scene? We hear somebody moaning. So we still don't, there's some weird imprisoned person in some weird nook of a lodge in his office. And then we find out the Lancaster isn't a part of the order.
Yeah, this thing had a lot to it. It was quick, but so we learned that Lancaster is not only a leader in police force, but he's also a leader in this lodge, this one of 35 lodges. He's also trying to get into the order, which historically we see the connection between slave catchers and rich whites who actually own slaves or enslaved Africans. And so the whiteness was an invention to stop basically black folks from uniting with poor whites to say, all right, we're sick of this. And so the poor whites were given a position just high enough so that they could be convinced that you're okay, but at least you're not black. You're not down there. And that was the overseer, the slave catcher position. And so we saw back in episode 1 where they viewed the KKK as poor whites. We're understanding that Lancaster is in that poor whites category. And so it makes sense that he's a police officer because that's the function of a slave catcher in modernity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The word officer is a derivative of overseer. So if you say it fast enough, like KRS-One, officer, 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 overseer, 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 it's one and the same. Yeah.
The connection.
So now we're at the garage. They're leaving for the trip. And this is another time where we're not hearing Tick listen to Letty. And I'm going to keep that going.
Yep, that's number 2.
Another time, Tick's not listening to Letty. Dee and Hip are on the trip all of a sudden. Montrose is still drinking. And Tree shows up. And Tree's on his way to Philly. And he decides to pop in the car. Hip lets him because she sees that there's some controversy surrounding him even going on the trip. And she's still pissed about the fact that she doesn't know what happened to George. And we see that in her face as they drive off. But Tree hops in the car on his way to Boston. Okay, so
to Philly.
On his way to Philly.
See, he's supposed to be going to Philly.
Right.
But he ends up all the way in Boston with them, which geographically, they go from Chicago to Boston. They have to pass Philly. I don't know why he's still in Boston with them.
Right. And I missed that. I think you brought that up and I was like, wait a minute, what was he doing at the museum talking about where's some dinosaurs? And he was supposed to be out the car like 8 miles ago.
Yeah.
So
I said that he's also a part of that whole Lavender Underground thing. So going to Philly for Philly to me meant, oh, he's going on a hookup, just like Montrose was hooked up with the security guard. You know, that whole we travel in these same kind of clubs, you know, that in bars that we know each other. In fact, I looked it up, Boston had a whole bar underground for lesbian gay activity. So they had a whole world. And so to me, this wasn't unusual to connect, but I still don't get why Tree went all the way to Boston.
We still don't know. And
Tree also gets left. They never come back. Like everyone left Boston, but we don't know what happened to Tree.
That's right.
Right.
And we have another timeline nod at Hip mentioning NACA.
Right. So this is one of those things to just place us where we are in time. So she mentions NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was the precursor to NASA. And so NACA basically took care of all aeronautics for America and started to move into space flight. And so this piece is taking place in 1955. NASA was commissioned in 1958. So that's why she calls it NACA, because it's 3 years prior to the establishment of NASA.
So from here, we have Ruby, right? Ruby at the department store. And Ruby there's a lot of emotions going on in this. Letty had told Ruby back in episode 1 that she was going to go get this job. Ruby saying they're not hiring colored girls. Ruby shows up. She's surprised. She sees there's a lot of things happen. She sees a petite young Black woman in here. She sees the fact that they don't hire a lot of Black folk. They have 103 employees and they've already got their token one. So there goes that. And I feel like this is the beginning of us seeing this breakdown with Ruby happening. Isn't that right?
Yeah, also the woman said she applied for the job on a whim. So that may have been a power suggestion coming from Christina to redirect Ruby in a direction that she wanted her to go in.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was especially the scene that we see later where Ruby's just in a bar and she's just real low, just really low. And we see that, you know, start to bud in that department store where she kind of plays it off. She's like, oh no, I'm just shopping. You know, it's a rat race and she doesn't even want to let the other Black woman know, yeah, I was going to apply. Yeah, I'm kind of pissed that you got it. And so she plays it off, puts her resume away and kind of, you know, it's a nod to that competition. And I feel like in that moment, she knew it was a competition and she lost. And so
we see
then
the
you just, when you see her, when you see her look down, and it's just like, and
it's
in
part
the
of the
first
setup.
episode, right. And in the first episode, we know she's been applying there for years. And so that was tough too.
But you know what? That also speaks to the duality theme that we picked up on earlier. The fact that as a Black person, number one, you still got to celebrate the first. We're still celebrating firsts for things in 2020. The fact that she was, boxed out of this, bad for her. But she also felt the good slightly that, okay, somebody got it. I still got to kind of celebrate it. And we're still doing that today.
Right, especially later when she says winner takes all. And so she still notices, she still recognizes it's a winner, it's a win.
Yeah.
But, she's still conflicted in that moment.
Now we jump over to the museum and we see our whole Woody car gang at the museum, at an integrated museum. And we get our first sort of blatant, because I know we were floating this theory around before about Montrose being gay. This is like the first time we get a heavy hint from Tree, of all people, which I almost thought, I was like, is he a credible source at this point? But after that weird tree leg comment he made, and we're already on to the fact that he lies. But he dropped this note about Montrose and Sammy, and now he's worming again another bug in the Tick's ear about this. So we see this popping up.
Yeah, they do a lot with this in the museum scene. So the first thing that happens, they arrive in the museum and Montrose connects with the security guard, and then they go into the basement of the museum, which is a little odd. I mean, it's a little odd. The guy's working a shift and he just moves away from what he's doing and go into the basement with Montrose. Maybe they're going to talk, we don't know. But then when we get that other brick of Tick laying there, and then it's just like, okay, so we're understanding that in addition to what we saw at the beginning of the episode. And so they're just drawing all these pieces together to let us know that this is what's happening.
And we're also seeing this other theme of snakes popping up. There's snakes, there's alligators, just other little things. We see the map for the, what is this?
The
exploration map. Yeah, the voyage map. We see, we're just starting to get little bits about where we're going in this museum intro scene.
So that snake is on the map. The word septentrion is on the map. And the statue of Titus, where that door is, he has a globe next to him, and the stand that's holding the globe is snakes as well. So there's a lot of snakes in this scene.
And also with that map, we see the actual middle passage of the transatlantic slave route. So it's a triangle. So it goes from the United States to Boston, or to England, and that's when the goods go back for refinement. So we don't see that part of it. What happens is it goes from England down to Africa or West Africa, then from West Africa to Guyana, up through the Caribbean, and then to America again. So the middle passage is that part from West Africa to South America, and then up through back to the United States. And so what we're noticing is when they said that, what is the guy's name? Titus. Titus was in shipping. We're seeing the shipping route, which is the slave trade route in that map. And so we also see that his contact with different people along that route. He has people in Guyana, he has people in the Caribbean, and then people in America, which is the indigenous people. So that's important to how he's interacting with people.
Now we're splicing. They start splicing scenes throughout this museum exploration, and they cut us over to answer our age-old question of if William and Christina are the same person.
Right.
So she's a shapeshifter.
Definitely obvious, because she walked in for a second and in a brief second came back out man.
Turn right back.
Which she did.
Turn right back around. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And and we can also remember that Sammy at the bar said that he saw a white man with a silver Bentley. So he saw William, but we've been only really seeing Christina, so that tied it as well.
That's a big reveal, though. Like that's a huge part of the story and how the story is moving, because now things start to make sense.
So she can play both sides.
Mm-hmm.
There goes our duality again. Now we pop back over to the museum, and now we start getting Indiana Jonesy, and Montrose is still knowing more than we think he knows, because even he knows to turn off some lights. We've got moon coming in. We got the moonlight coming in. That's the key to get into here. And and the thing that I like the most about this scene is we see Letty showing up as a hero again. We see Letty not giving any, getting the map, breaking glass, flying down rope. She's in a jumper. She doesn't care. She is getting it done. And I love that about this whole scene. So
this is also another time when she's not, where Tick doesn't listen to her again. As they get down there, Montrose is scared to go. When she gets down there, and when they're choosing which tunnel to go down, they're talking through it. And so she says, Montrose is saying he knows something, but then she's like, well, I read the brochure, and here's what we need to do. Then they start to proceed down the tunnel. When they do proceed down the tunnel, Tick is like, hold on, wait. And Letty's like, nah, we good. We know the answer, so here we go. So that's just him again, not listening to Black women, or in his world, Black women, but also specifically Letty, and her just blazing the trail as the leader of the group.
And I know I mentioned this before, it's not sitting well with me that he's sitting here looking at this hook that is missing a lantern, and Tick is just standing there, and they're bringing our focus to that. I don't know what that means, but I noticed it, and I just want to make note of that. I don't know what that's going to actually play in.
So we don't know why that is yet. So logically, at the point of what we know in the story, Tick's logic is sound. He's looking at the empty hook saying, someone's gone down this tunnel before. This is probably the tunnel. Letty's looking at a tunnel. She doesn't look at the lantern, but the lantern's there, which means no one's gone down, but that's the one that she chooses to go down. So at that point, look, you can kind of see, all right, Tick is actually, he might have a point, but we'll see later that there's something else behind that.
But that lantern may have been from the person whose arm was stuck in the door.
Right, we didn't get, so they don't know that yet. So yes, that's exactly it.
And so I was trying to figure out, how Letty was like, oh, okay, it's the North Tunnel. I was like, how do you know that? So I started to write everything down, again with this play pause. And so Tick sees the compass on the ground, he's wiping it off. And so when Letty throws the map down and then descends, we learn that the compass on the ground and the ledger from the map of the voyages adds up, they match up. The 3 tunnels Tick realizes are related to Titus's expeditions. And that's just from his knowledge of reading adventure novels. And so then we find out from Montrose, Titus raided Guyana. And so the correct tunnel is westbound, because according to his voyages, he went, east over to Africa. He went west to Guyana. And so, Montrose's like, I read a book, I just know. So then here comes Letty again. Oh, the first renovations to the museum after Titus returned from the Caribbean. The Caribbean was his last voyage. And we learned that earlier too in the museum, when the white woman's walking everybody through the museum, talking about Titus. And so now I'm thinking, especially later, what we see in the episode, could Titus have raided Guyana for all it's worth, and possibly, its magic, possibly, learn their ways, stole it, claim it as his, and earlier too, we see the woman who's leading people through Titus's exhibit. She says, oh, these are all of the artifacts that were gifted to him for bringing civilization to the savages, in so many words. And in my mind, I'm thinking, stole, let's not, okay.
Exactly.
Right. So then I started to put the map together. So I said, according to the map, Titus went east to Africa, west to Guyana, and then north to the Caribbean, which was his last voyage, back up to Boston. So that's how Letty knew, okay, it's the North Tunnel, and that's the one that's going to lead to his vault, to his pages, to home.
So this is going to go kind of rapid fire. I'm just going to interject this. So they cut over to Ruby. She's at the bar. This is the first time she's meeting William. Her set bombs. This is another, slash against Ruby's ego and another, bringing her down a notch. She meets William, and then they cut us back over to the bridge. They cut us back over to them in the tunnel. And here at the tunnel, we see them, they hit this plank that they keep referring to, not a bridge. They keep calling it a plank. And they wrap this rope around Letty. And Montrose goes into this deep historical, ancestral story to bring Letty some encouragement. And then we discover that didn't even happen.
Right. So he's telling the story that's not a real story, but it conveys a real reality for Black people in America. And that is the way that we transfer knowledge. And that knowledge is passed down orally. That's African. So that's something that we kept with us. And so even though the story is told to motivate her to move forward, at least we know he's aware that oral transmission is the method of knowledge transfer for Black people, which now we can ask ourselves the question, how much of the book that he burned did he retain for possible transmission later?
Okay, so no, we don't have anything else there yet. Okay, so then Ruby, now we're cut back to Ruby and William at the bar. And this is Ruby's speech, right? This is when Ruby's getting into explaining, like, if I was in your skin, I wouldn't have these problems. This is the rat race. And we're seeing, I have notes here that we're seeing the sexualization of Black women. We're seeing women in regards, Black women, especially in regards to forbidden fruit. We keep seeing these Adam and Eve references popping up. And we see William striking up this deal with Ruby and trying to explain, like, I could give you the world. And she's like, I've heard that before. And he's like, but I can. And so now Ruby's intrigued. She is lured.
Yeah.
Right?
I would totally add that you got, first of all, the fact that William is sitting in a Black bar, 1955. Whites inside of Black spaces did not get rebuked, which is completely different from what Black people were living, trying to go into white spaces. And so it's not far-fetched from what we go through now, wherein whites might want to interject themselves into Black spaces because they feel that they have a right and a place and whatever. But the fact that William is chilling there and nobody's giving him a side eye tells you that not much has changed unless you decide to become vocal about it, right? And he slides in with this devil's contract that she's tempted by, obviously, because he's created a place for her with nowhere to go.
So maybe a little white saviorism. A little bit of that.
I agree. There is some white saviorism there, but also when you go back into the Bible, Satan said unto Christ that if you fall down and worship me, all this and all the kingdoms and the power of it will I give unto you. So this goes back throughout the annals of history, where you're being offered something if you just fall down and follow me. So he was offering that to Ruby.
Temptation of Christ.
And then honestly, again, I feel like we see this snake pop up, where it's a little tempting. It's a lure. It's, oh, I promise you this, I promise you that. And at this point, Ruby is in a fight with Letty. She doesn't get the job. Her set tanks. And this is like her last wall of defense. And she's still trying to hold on to it. And you can see she's still like, it ain't gonna happen. Right. I've heard this before. And then finally.
And we have reason to believe that Christina might have orchestrated this. So in giving Letty the money for this house, Letty buys the house. It creates a rift between her and Ruby. And now she has a way into the house because she can just flip sides. Now I'm going to play this Ruby angle because I already might have let sister girl get this job at the place. I know Ruby's in a delicate place. Now I'm going to just play the easier angle because Letty's not having it. And she already knows that she's a worthy component. So Christina, I'm wondering if Christina just tried to take the softer road, I'll say.
She's playing an enormous game of chess,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the players don't know that they're even playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we'll see.
So then we pop over to the tunnel and we see another sign of sabotage from Tros, because now they find out that he had the book, he burned the book, Tick's mad about it, and Letty is still in the background trying to solve this mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have this father, uncle, daddy, son, whatever we want to call this situation happening over here. Letty is in the background. She finds her neighbor floating by, one of the white boys that broke into the house. And this is the first time that we have an indication that we are not playing with the right time space continuum, because we are in Boston and we see her neighbor float by.
Right, the neighbor that we just saw in Chicago last episode. So it's like, wait a minute, was something spatially is happening here that we're not aware of, like you said. So the rules, like you said earlier, the rules do not apply. And so what is it that we're dealing with?
And the only rule that seems to have stuck is that we did end up north, which is
right.
But okay.
Oh,
that's a good point.
Yeah, because it didn't make sense that tunnel would lead all the way from Boston back to Chicago.
Yeah.
So there had to be something on there with the time.
Yeah.
And then we see Letty finds the vault. Letty finds the vault, and Hiram's arm is in the door with the ring. With Pam called it Hiram's arm with the ring, with the sleeve, the white lab coat sleeve. All of this is stuck in the door. So what?
So what we can determine is that Hiram would maybe take that elevator down and try to get into the door. And so one of those times he got in his white lab coat, went down there, stuck his arm in the door, couldn't get it out because he didn't have the blood. And so now we're wondering, what's the connection between the blood and how much of that connection did Hiram know? Because he was experimenting on all Black people. And so is he understanding that this just doesn't work with me, and I need to find one of Titus's ancestors or descendants to open this door for me?
And this is another time we see a key being used to open a locked thing, and a Black man, just like how he opened that portal, is the key to something these people need access to, right?
Right.
So his blood is the key that unlocks the door. We get into the vault and we are met with Yahima. And this is the first time that we see Atticus listen to a woman, but we are seeing a woman that has a bit of a dual spirit going on. So she very much also has some male energy.
Right.
Right. And genitalia.
Spirit,
and
right?
genitalia.
Right. Which gives us kind of, do we decide if she's a hermaphrodite, or is it, as she explains to us, and we should believe somebody when they tell us who they are, that she is a two-spirit. And that is a native thought process, I want to say that, a native thought that certain bodies embody both the male and female spirit. And so she's a representation of that. I think maybe they bothered to do the hermaphrodite look to kind of Americanize it so that there's understanding rather than the ephemeral concept, oh, it's two-spirit. No, they showed it to you physically to make you go, what?
So when Yahima shows up, we do get this gender social commentary when Macho says, he says, what are you? And then Tick corrects that and says, who are you? and so it humanizes, it lets us know this is a person we're dealing with and not a thing. And so that's really important commentary, especially during as we progress towards trans rights. What's the appropriate thing to say? Like, how do we make sure that we're ensuring that we humanize everyone? And so this applies even in Yahima's case as their understanding. So that was an intentional correction on Tick's part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we're also hearing she made a very poignant statement to say that I'd never seen anybody so hungry when Titus showed up. And I think that we were making a note that that's just showing some of the consumerism of the cultures of people of color all over the world by white explorers, and just that commentary of the hunger. And
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And power.
And power.
Yeah, the hunger within their manifest destiny, thinking they can have carte blanche to just take over the world.
And maybe if we stepped outside of thinking in colonialism terms, maybe we should be calling them exploiters, not explorers.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we've woven through this vampire thread a few times in terms of Christina not being able to access the door. And so we see that show up possibly here with that insatiable hunger that Yahima mentions. So it's possible that the white people are the vampires of this story, and the Black people are the different thing, the remaking of that mythology into something other than what we're familiar with. And so that when she says he's always hungry, I read that as potential vampirism, the way capitalism works. I see a lot of things in that statement, those two sentences that she had.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the white disconnection with Mother Nature, that they don't respect it. They don't respect leaving things as they are, thinking always to take. As soon as I land here, I'm going to take. And so I think when she says that I am not my forefathers, when they have this quick discussion, most of the time we've been saying I am not my ancestors. Late we've been saying that in our time, but she's really saying I will not make the same mistake they made by opening their arms, much as American Indians opened their arms to the Pilgrims, and eventually everyone, dies. But I think she's foreshadowing that I will not make that mistake because I am not my forefathers, because I don't know your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
She brings it. She's not like, I don't need to know you in, hi, who you are, what's your name. I don't know your spirit. And that is the distinction. She says, I'm no longer going to follow intuition, which is something people of color have always relied on. This sense of, I feel you. We say that all the time. Oh, I feel you.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, we rely on our intuition, which gets us through a lot of shit. A lot of these episodes rely on people's intuition. And Mike, you keep pointing out Letty, who runs by intuition mostly, even if she has just a little bit of knowledge that's been given to her factually, she runs in that direction. And more so as time has gone on.
Right.
And we also see the ship reference again, because they're in the hull of a ship. And you see people that have lost their lives in this room that didn't quite make it to wherever they were going. So we have that nod to that transatlantic slave map. Yahima was, as indicated by the markings on her body, a shaman. So she was the healer, protector of her people, and also the protector of those scrolls. And we see her, and somebody mentioned before that we saw as when she kind of gave him that statement, she almost powered back down, like she was about to go right back into her station, until Tick began to speak. And he all of a sudden understands this language, and it becomes clear to us that we are the sons of Adam, because of course he knows all languages. And I just checked out for a minute because I was getting these messages. So if that was said already, I'm sorry for like going back to that. And
not only, this is not the first time that we see him encountering a different language, because way back in episode 1, when the alien comes down, she speaks in the language of Adam. And we don't quite know that he understands it, but I put on the closed captions, it was the language of Adam. And also when he's fighting that same woman in that scene where they're all trapped and Christina's allowing a portal to be shown to, you know, the lodge guests and that sort of thing. The woman that he's fighting also shouts in the language of Adam as well. And so this is like the third time that, you know, not only does he understand her, but she understands him. And there's a mutual communication going on. And so at this point we know, and also much to Pam's point, I took Yahima's statement as you Tik are not your forefathers, because he also says blood, not family. We were of the same bloodline, me and Titus, but we're not family in any way. And so, you know, and she mentions I had no reason to distrust Titus, but once I, you know, realized who he was and what he was, you know, that power hungry individual, that's when she stopped deciphering for him. Because as we know, she's from the land of many waters, which is also related to the high tides that kill off any seekers looking for the pages. And Titus comes on his ship looking for who could read this book, who could decipher these symbols, which I take that as, you know, the book of names, the book Hannah ran out with, and the book that is gone, according to Christina. And so Yahima then, you know, reveals that she knew the symbols from the cave of Alamun Kundi. And she, you know, being a shaman that we've deduced, you know, is able to decipher this for him. And so I took that as her saying, you know, I know that your sins are not your forefathers' sins, Tik, but I still don't know your spirit. I still don't trust you. And that's why she gets back into that same chair. She puts her hand over the scroll and she nods and she kind of powers down, you know, protecting these scrolls.
So we take her name, Yahima, and I was talking about this, that perhaps it's a variation of Yemiya, which is the Orisha who guards the oceans, waters, lands, the land of water, I should say. And she says she's from the land of many waters. Is that what she? And her last name, Marakota, in Hindi means Mercury, which was the messenger of the gods. So you got the writers layering upon layer of indigenous culture and things that we may have already incorporated into our normal lives, but we're not really thinking about what they mean. And so they just keep layering stuff on top of stuff. And it's just interesting to have to peel back like this onion layer of who she is, what she represents, you know?
So at this point, I'm wondering, we started in episode 2, I guess, when they were at the mansion, and it was all white people at the dinner, and Tik and George were there. And so they're the only black people in the sea of white people at this order who was all chasing this magic. And everyone, Christina, her dad, everyone's chasing this magic. But now in this scene, I'm wondering, whose magic are they chasing? Because Titus came through Guyana, through the Caribbean, and then to Americas with the indigenous peoples. And so if the it's white people chasing it, but it's most likely not their magic. They're trying to consume something that's not theirs. They're trying to consume the magic of Africans and Guyanans and people from the Caribbean and indigenous peoples. And that's why they know all of this information. And white people seem to be trying to attain it.
Cultural appropriation. I can't believe that.
Right. And, you know, even going back to when Samuel is like, I'm Adam. And he's so confident in that statement. And he's trying to get back to the Garden of Eden. And at that moment, we don't know really. We're like, okay, he's Adam, yet you still need Tik and his blood and that bloodline to get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a direct contradiction there as well. Yeah, now
Now
it's even more evident.
Now they escape, and we discover that
Letty
Yahima,
saves the day again.
Letty saves the day again. I'll just pop that in there. Letty saves the day. She swims out of the elevator, saves the map. She's like putting herself on the line. She is literally fighting against that fuck upness that Ruby laid on her or tried to, because she is out here, you know, putting her own life on the line and not being a fuck up. Basically, she's proving her wrong. And we discover that Yahima is a siren, and that is like just mind blowing. Amira.
Hi.
Hey.
Sorry,
It's okay. We just got to the elevator, but I want you to give your notes before we get past that on Yahima. And we were just covering just a little bit about her background, being a shaman. She's the protector of her people, and just give us your thoughts.
So I watched it again, and basically they're referencing the Trojan War and Homer and the Odyssey. That's where the siren part coming, because sirens was first discovered in Homer's Odyssey. And basically sirens are basically used as a form of like connecting, as a form of like protection. So he had her there to protect his part of the book. I think we talked about the aspect of like the duality in regards to her role. So not only is she a woman, but she's a man. So that makes her more powerful. And she comes from an indigenous tribe of people in South America / the Caribbeans. Basically the Locono of South America and Taino. Yeah, and
No, go ahead.
I noticed throughout the frequency, the aspect is silencing women. So you'll catch at the end what Mantra does to her, and it's basically to silence her. But she is a powerful being in regards to who she is and the role that she plays, even through the markings, like the markings that were on her body, identifies her as powerful being. Yeah.
And so she's also another key. Since we have this other theme of keys unlocking lock things, she's a person that can translate and interpret and help them
with
the book and understanding and unlocking this mystery. So we have another key that we have present with us.
So right there, the key is the theme, and the keys is listening to women. So we see Hip trying to unlock whatever the key is attached to the orrery. We see Letty being the key to the right tunnel and the way to go. And then we see Yahima as the key for deciphering or understanding this language. And so at each point, that's what's being woven through. The women are the key, or the feminine energy is the key.
And Yahima also represents what we know is in World War II, or the code talkers, the Native Americans who actually use their language to keep white, so keep the Nazis from learning what was transpiring with the Allies. Code talkers, Native code talkers were used from Comanche to Navajo, but they were also kind of left off of history until recently, right? And so Yahima, also a code talker. You get this theme of whites always having to come back and rely on the source, which turns out to be who? Indigenous, brown, Black people.
So we have our siren. She can't speak outside the water. Tick punches her out. I peeped that. That was aggressive, but necessary, because that was too much. That was a little bit too much. And we cut over to Hip and D in the car. And Hip looks like your mad mama that it's not lining up and she has questions. And D, I believe, asked, how'd they get back to Chicago without the car?
Mm-hmm.
So D, I don't really know yet if she understands the weight of that question. If D is in on, is there something odd going on here with all of you adults?
Yeah.
You
So
know?
that's also the confirmation that we are where we thought we were, and we were in the basement of Letty's house, or at least connected to the basement of the Winthrop house, even though we were in Boston.
And you know, the elevator being spelled makes me think, you know, they're not just, and it working, these elevators are not just lone mechanisms, you know, in the tunnel where you guys are, and maybe that takes you to the destination that you seek.
It's like a portal.
Yeah, you know, like it's a portal, and you know, we know for sure that it's spelled. And so especially that symbol that is on his navel looks like the symbol when the elevator is first going down and we see the three white men in the tunnel.
Yeah.
Symbol that flashes looks like the symbol on her. And so it's really interesting to note that about those elevators.
So I think what you got asked the question was, remember in the second episode with Letty, when the elevator goes all the way down, is that people that Hiram tested on, or is that part of the people that was with Yahima?
Oh.
Yahima. Because you saw all those dead bodies. And at first I was like, well, that's Hiram because he was testing on people. But it also reaffirms you that he was able to time travel. So it gives, and he has this fascination with space. So it gives you a pretext that maybe the key to the orrery may not be in that time phase.
And
And
he was,
honestly, go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to say that he was testing on the people, and he was also testing the time travel, as was said by Misha Green in an article, which is what was distorting these people with the baby head on one person. They would come back and their body would be disfigured.
Yeah, and we know that the orrery has a spell on it. We know that that also is a key to Hiram's time machine per Christina. And so I looked into just astrology and time travel and just to kind of connect the dots. And I found something that says when you look at the night sky, the light hitting your eye at that moment actually left those stars hundreds of years ago. For example, Gamma Aries, one of the stars in the Aries constellation, is approximately 164 light years away, meaning that the light you see tonight left that star in 1854.
Yeah.
So when you look at the rest of the constellations, how far back in time are you looking? So astrology, light years itself is time. It is time travel. And so that connected all those dots for me, because I'm like, how is astrology, how is this orrery? And I know it's connected to time, but I just needed that to kind of click into place. That
it's the aspect of, oh, sorry.
Say what? No, go ahead.
I said it's like the aspect of the quantum physics.
Exactly.
That's basically, yeah.
Wait a minute. Wait, hold on. China, you were just going to sit on a pot of tea like that? Are you kidding?
You know what?
Are you kidding?
It was a lot. This whole episode was a lot to unpack. And, you know, and they're talking about in that scene with Hip and her dad. And I low-key think that I love that little tidbit because she's talking to her dad almost like she's a child again. You know, but Dad, isn't this, and then, and he, you know, seems almost like an astrology professor of some sort. And so that's how we know that she got into that. But, you know, they're talking about the Virgo cluster. We're in Virgo season also, sign-wise. And so I thought that I was trying to connect the dots, and that little tidbit that I found online was literally just brought everything together in terms of, just for people who don't know how astrology ties into time travel.
Mm.
Oh,
Well, they say
on
that.
that,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. On that note, the beam of light from a star travels hundreds of years, and we're just seeing it. That could also be a portal through time, because as that light travels, you go through that portal, you're entering different spaces in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that makes me think that Hiram's missing pages. We know that he was looking for Titus's pages because he done lost his arm looking for him.
Right.
But we also know that he had a set of pages too, which are Winthrop's pages that were stolen. And so I theorize that he's hidden those pages in time somewhere via this orrery.
Mm-hmm.
And now we know Christine is looking for it
Mm-hmm.
as well. So
maybe,
and it's gonna tie into hip. We know it's gonna tie into hip. Hip is one of the keys to locating it. And again, you see the women as being keys. It's hip.
Yeah.
And so
even on, go ahead.
So we're still in the car, and Hip sees that atlas. Because Dee's sitting up there playing with the atlas. And now we see that Hip is back on this. She finally has like a lead, because it's still not closed to her what happened to her husband. So now we see Hip is on her own journey. She swings the car around, and she's headed back to Devon County to find some remnant of what happened to George. So I believe that's where we leave off with Hip and Dee. Now we cut over back to the house. We have our siren. She is revived, and they're keeping her comfortable. Tick makes a note to let us know how important this woman is. We need her. We're going to keep her comfortable. She's going to help us. And then Montrose has this heartfelt moment that's still at a distance, because I remember we were making a note that Montrose puts some distance between Tick and his mother and their relationship with his mother.
Yeah, so he did that in the tunnel when he was talking about how his mother was, I can't remember how he said it, his mother was something special, thought differently. But here he's saying, your mother would be proud of you. And so this is also, I guess, foot stomping the fact that Montrose is not Tick's father, because it wouldn't make sense for him to say, well, we're proud of you. I'm proud of you too. He doesn't say anything like that. He's just talking about her.
He doesn't.
But also, I'm sorry, go ahead, Amara.
He says to him, I watched it again. He says to him, you're so brave. So he says, you're so brave. And then he goes into saying, your mother would be proud of you. I think, and let me be honest, I think especially during that time, it's touching on the aspect of the male masculinity in regards to like not showing emotion. Like they really were like that in that time, where that emotional piece was a disconnect. So I think it's touching on that again. And you even, like, for me, I know personally, for me, I used to be a social worker. You still see that now. Like, it's a disconnect emotionally for men. And I think Montrose is playing that character into that aspect where it's like he has to be a man. He can't show emotional. He can't be emotional. So I think him saying you were brave today was a way of him saying, I'm proud of you.
Right.
Right.
And you know what's also interesting about that too, him saying, your mother would be proud of you. We know that his mom is of the bloodline. We know through George that she was particularly interested in her bloodline before she passed. Still don't know how she passed. Montrose may know something, and I'm betting that he does. But I took that to mean, you're following in your mom's footsteps. Or, she was special. She was complicated. She was a little crazy like the rest of them, he says in the tunnel. And so, Montrose, especially checking out all those books, and George knowing what he knew. And, I think there's a lot of family unpacking to do there. But I do think Montrose knows about his mom about everything that she, you know, that comes along with that bloodline and that family. And so in that moment, it's, you know, I know about this magic. I know about these wizards. I know about all of this. We just witnessed something, and you were brave while doing this. And your mom, who was also very heavily invested in this, would be proud of what you're doing.
Can I just back up and say, in this scene, we learn that that Yahima can just close her mouth and the siren scream stops. So the fact that Tick just punched her just immediately is not sitting well with me. I mean, like, you could have just been quiet. Just close your mouth and it's okay.
I don't think they knew that. I think that's when they discovered, like, if you close her mouth, she'll stop.
I mean, that's his first response. Like, she's...
Well, that may be the soldier in him, too. Attack the situation. So he immediately let the soldier in him. Plus, time we're more hands-on instead of figure something out, which is what he keeps on running into with Letty. She figures things out and then moves on it, but he's more the attack level as a soldier.
And this is the first time Yahima has been off the ship. She doesn't know that that spell is going to overcome her, you know, and so she just is being who she
was
is.
just talking.
Right.
She was just talking.
Yeah.
But the spell just took over, and of course she can't speak.
And thanks for pointing that out too, because that's an interesting little thing that we are seeing with Tick running in and having action without taking the time to kind of.
It's like he's the muscle and Letty's the brain.
Yep.
And you know, we mentioned something about Letty too, about how she's so fearless. And how she's developed, and we don't really we didn't even need to see who Letty was before she became part of the undead. But we do get these little deductions, you know, from Ruby, from Marvin, when they're arguing, that, you know, she is a fuck up. You know, she's often leveraged her relationships with Marvin and Ruby to get what she wants, to get ahead. She's a wanderer. She's an activist. She's a pioneer. And so she always had this kind of fearless type of, you know, thing about her. But I think once she crosses over and she comes back and she's sitting in that church and, you know, she's grasping for Tick and she's grasping for Ruby and, you know, grasping for a purpose, I think it becomes clear to her, especially in the ghost scene as well, that, you know, I don't really have anything to lose. So why not be fearless? Why not go into this? I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm searching for. I don't know what my mission, my purpose is. So she kind of takes on her purpose as, you know, let's just go for it. You know, why not? And I think that's an important aspect to the story, especially when you have Tick going, oh, well, let's think about this. Oh, wait, Letty, don't propel down here yet. You know, let me see what this is first. And Letty's just like, no, like, there's no time.
So he is playing that role of protector for her, though, too. So I think it's not only because she's a woman, but she's his woman. In a way, she's his woman. So he's like, let me make sure this is, like, I get what you guys are saying, but I also see, like, as a man, especially during that time, they were brought up to be that way. I think he's following after more so George than Montrose, but they're going to be that protector. So I don't think he's doing it in a way where it's like, you're a woman, shut up. I think he's doing it in a way, well, let me figure out what's down here. I don't want you to get hurt. And he keeps saying that, like, even when he pulled the gun on Christina, his major thing was stay the fuck away from my family. And in his mind, he's being a protector. So
But Letty checked him on that in this episode. When he told him to get into the elevator, she was like, stop acting like the world fucking revolves around you. And so even though Tick may envision himself as the protector, like we saw this in Get Out, like the male character wasn't the protector. It was Lupita's character. And so in this case, this is the second time we've seen Letty save them. So she ran the first time, she's swimming this time. She's as much a protector as anybody on that squad.
Yeah, she's a triathlon at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the Owens.
And then she checked him in the tunnel and then proceeded to find the vault.
Yeah, that part.
I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
It's something that men have to be aware of, that we're a team. It's not just about you.
Right.
Yeah.
We have to work together.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think Letty's proved that too many times for Tick to still be acting like, you know, she's not Letitia fucking Lewis.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we know now the weight of finding this last key. Yahima is a big piece of this puzzle. And here comes Montrose in here to play bad cop. And I thought he was just going to impart, you know, his little piece. And then he kills our key. What is his motivation at this point? Like, is he still doing this in anybody's best interest, or is he just trying to save his own secrets from being uncovered?
I think he's trying to save them. Like, I think he doesn't want, his major thing is I don't want you to have to deal with this. This is not a competition for you. You are going to lose. You're in a realm of something you have no understanding of. So I think he did it for that. I'm going to be honest, looking up Sirens, I don't think she's dead. I think he may think that she's going to die, but I don't think she's dead. You also see the play on the aspect of, like, silencing women. Like, here she is, the most powerful piece, and you want to kill her. But another thing that came to my mind is, I think Tick may know the language. He just hasn't seen it yet, because he's picking up on different languages because when he was talking to the siren, we were looking like, how the hell? Even they all were looking at him like, how do you know what she's saying? So I think she played the role of being the key to guide him there. But I think he's going to be able to kind of like interpret what the book is saying on his own.
Also, going back to Montrose, I feel like he's a saboteur, because if you see his reactions, he's always saying we can't win. He says we're the story. He chides with Atticus, telling him that, no, when he slams his hand on the table, and then he keeps on going back and forth saying we can't win. So I really don't trust him. I don't trust what he may have done to his wife. I've definitely seen what he did to the siren. So, and the other part, when he came out of the ground and they said that we're here to save you, he said, I saved my damn self. So he's looking out for himself, realizing that we're in a losing situation. So I think he's a saboteur, to coin a phrase that's often used today, a coon. So I really don't trust him.
You think he's
we don't know what happened to him during that kidnapping. So I'm sure we're gonna get some of that story.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
I believe affected him.
Maybe he's an agent provocateur, which is he's acting on the other side. If he stays close, you know, even though he tries to stop them, there's always a character like that in a lot of these shows, like sci-fi shows, that, you know, they're assholes, but they still got to make it onto the mission with everybody, still causing trouble. And the main characters don't cut them out for whatever reason. And they are there to the very end, causing trouble the whole way. So I'm looking at him as not only a saboteur, but an agent provocateur.
I think it's interesting how he didn't want to help them. He didn't want to help them, and he let Tick leave. And then he said, let's go to Boston.
Right. It's not intentional for him to work for the other side, but in his own of saving himself, he does it. He's going along with the ride, but the same.
Right, because he shows way too much guilt, way too much shame. And that's evident in the very beginning.
But even in the fact that he's gay, like that's
exactly,
you know, especially during that time, that's the shame of it all. So I think a lot of the time he's battling himself. I look at it as like he's trying to prevent them from going on the mission. So I think when it came to Letty calling him an ass, I think that's when he was like, you know what, they're gonna do it anyway. And he said it like, I'm trying to stop you, but your ass won't listen. You still doing what you want to do. So in a way, he's looking at it as them being selfish, as Tick being selfish, because he's telling him stop what you're doing. Because to me, I think Montrose is basically a runner. Basically, he's one of those people that he'll see some shit happen and he'll pretend that it doesn't.
Right.
Like,
So let me ask you guys this. Do you think that since Montrose knew enough to know that the vault was in Boston, do you think that Montrose knew that that siren was there and that's why he went on the thing with the intent of getting rid of the siren?
I don't
Quite
think he knew the
possibly.
siren was there.
Mm.
I don't think he knew the siren was there. I don't think
Okay.
Because
none
we
of them
don't
knew
know
that.
what's in the bylaws as well. But just judging off of how Christina / William has been able to play on each character's fears and wants
Mhm.
and needs, and how William gets into Ruby and kind of causes issues there. And we know that William was the one who found Montrose at the bar.
Yeah.
And both William and Christina are able to get information and then leverage that information. So I think it's quite possible that Christina could be holding that over Montrose's head, like, look, stop them or get as much information as you can. And Montrose is conflicted because he wants to help them, but at the same time he doesn't want them to fall into Christina's trap. That's really what I think. That's where I think the most guilt and shame comes from. I mean, of course, his backstory and who he is as a person, but I think quite possibly he literally does not want them to fall into Christina's trap.
So do we have any burning questions that we could pose to the group?
Well, I think Montrose's motivation now is obscured, so we can't know. I mean, so during that time when he was kidnapped, it could have been just a normal kidnapping, and who wants to go back into trauma, the heart of trauma after that? That could be his motivation. It could be the shame. It could be the agent provocateur thing. So I think the overarching. The other thing is Montrose, like you brought up, China, he is conflicted because on one hand he's killing the siren, but on the other hand he's trying to figure out the right tunnel to go down. So he's working towards it and against it. And so the question is, what do we believe at this point of not being able to know? What do we believe Montrose's motivation is?
Yeah, he seems conflicted.
Okay. Well, I think we've given everybody a lot of food for thought.
Yes.
Also, something that I noticed, this episode definitely gives way to adventure. The relationship arcs kind of take a back seat. We do still see Tick and Letty, we see more of that develop, but in terms of, the past 3 episodes versus this episode, we get less of Tick and Montrose. We get less of Tick and George and Montrose. Letty and Ruby definitely takes a back seat. And so I noticed that there's a switch in subgenre of each episode. So the first episode, we get monsters and gore. Second episode is magic. Third episode is ghosts. And now this 4th episode is adventure. And so I'm just interested to see, what pattern that's going to take on with the next episodes. That was really cool.
Any closing thoughts, y'all?
Somebody touched on Montrose being an alcoholic, and why was he the only person shivering in the water? And I asked, if you're an alcoholic, how does your blood run, basically? Are you always cold? Everybody went, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that true? Because I just know drinking wine, you get warm. But I don't know about actual full-blown alcoholism.
He's an alcoholic, so his body is shutting down because he's not getting his fix of alcohol.
Exactly.
That's why
almost
he's so jittery.
Almost every scene we've seen him in, he either has a flask or a bottle. And especially throughout this entire episode. So, it's been 2 hours. They had 2 hours to go through the tunnels and everything. And I think it's
even longer than that, because he took a sip. He took a sip when they were at the garage, and he was like, "This isn't my fault, y'all." And then here comes him.
Right.
It's a 15-hour ride to Boston. Because Letty was like, I got to be in the car with y'all for 15 hours. And then when they got to the museum, the meetup was within 3 hours.
The DTs.
All right, let's throw it to him.
All right. This is fun.
Okay.